Good afternoon to you. I'm Danilo Evangelista, and welcome to our tropical weather outlook for today, July 11th, 2024. Let's start off with the National Hurricane Center because there is a area of interest off the southeast coast today. It's a small area, and it doesn't look like it's going to do much, but it does have a chance nonetheless over the next 7 days. Only a 10% chance. Once again, it is a disorganized area of showers and thunderstorms that is off the southeast coast and will probably bring rain to the southeast and I think further areas as the week goes on. But in terms of development, this has a small chance, but I'll show you in the satellite in just a moment. It's really not looking too promising that much of anything will come out of this, but it is once again an area of interest nonetheless. We also have in the Eastern Pacific some looks like we could finally might get a chance for development. There's a 20% chance within the next week. It looks like it's going to be one of these former tropical waves in the Atlantic that they're making their way into the Eastern Pacific, and it looks like things could be favorable enough that over the central Eastern Pacific we might get some sort of development to occur probably next week. But we'll have to watch and wait and see because none of the models are not really that enthusiastic about if anything will come out of the Eastern Pacific in the first place over at least the next week, which is once again just continuing this very unusual theme of how this hurricane season is playing so far. Not only in the not only in the Atlantic, but also in the Eastern Pacific. Here in the Atlantic, we had Category 5 Hurricane Beryl, and in the Eastern Pacific so far, they've only had one weak tropical storm. So we'll see if this does become anything, but I'm also not looking too promising as of right now, and I've not seen a lot of enthusiasm on models, at least as of right now. Taking a satellite look of the Atlantic, this is the Caribbean. You can see in the Eastern Pacific it is barren right now, not really much of anything to write home about, but that is our area of disturbed weather that we're watching, and that'll probably contribute to any sort of development chance that occurs in the Eastern Pacific. And then here's our area of interest off the southwest, or I should say the southeast coast, not the southwest coast, because that would be the Eastern Pacific. But off the southeast coast, there's an area of interest, and you can see lots of disorganized showers and thunderstorms. I believe there's also lots of shear too. There's some sort of upper level low in here, and it just doesn't seem like this is going to develop into much in terms of anything tropical or even subtropical. Although we do sometimes get development around this area, especially this time of year. That's actually, especially early on in the season, we really look off the southeast coast, especially for these quick spin ups, which sometimes yield us in named storms. And that's actually really been happening, especially as of recently over the last several years. We haven't had one yet this year, so maybe we'll see if this does have still a chance to do that. In terms of sea surface temperature anomalies, at least in the ocean, I mean, it is generally a well-known idea, though, across the entire Atlantic that it is very warm, especially off the southeast coast. Sea surface temperatures there are very warm, so that would obviously aid in any sort of quick spin up that occurs there. So it's possible. Maybe this might gain enough convection that it develops some sort of low-level center in one of these areas, but I'm not that quite sure about it. I don't think it has that much time to do so. And once again, it's probably just not looking that favorable. But oceanically, at least around the southeast coast, especially associated with the Gulf Stream, it is very warm, and that would work in its favor, as well as the rest of the MDR. Just incredible warmth, even into the Caribbean, right on the heels of Beryl. Caribbean is barely cooled down, as well as the Gulf. There's a few chippings at the Gulf, but it is July. It is getting to the peak of summer, and the entire Gulf will warm back up right to where it is, right to where it was before, in no time. And you could definitely trust me when I say that. In the Pacific, on the other hand, with sea surface temperature anomalies, do want to bring it up today because obviously we have neutral conditions out there. And there is actually something that the Climate Prediction Center put out about La Nina and neutral today, so we'll go over that. But you could see neutral conditions still prevailing. Looks like we're going to go into this hurricane season, or at least into the peak of this hurricane season, with no El Nino, and especially as I said before, with an Atlantic that is this warm, um, I it I don't think it makes a difference whether or not we're in neutral or La Nina. As long as there is no El Nino, I think we are pretty good to take off. And you can see we're in neutral conditions right now, still on the bottom, on the borderline actually of warm neutral. We've not quite tanked below the 0 degree line yet. And that is very interesting because, as I said before, neutral conditions, it really doesn't matter, neutral or La Nina. But um, if you remember us talking about it for the longest time, lots of climate models are really aggressive on a potentially very potent La Nina incoming this fall and into this winter, and it would contribute to a very active hurricane season this year. Looks like we're on a little bit more of the delayed side with that. But nonetheless, we still have neutral conditions. And once again, as I said before, as long as we don't go back into strong El Nino territory, I don't see any sort of thing that would suppress us in the Atlantic from the aspect of ENSO. Especially given that, as I said before, the Climate Prediction Center today just came out saying that we are in neutral conditions and they expect neutral conditions to continue for the next several months. And they expect that La Nina will be favored during the August to October period, which is the peak of the hurricane season. And you can see that on their graph here. Neutral conditions expected into the next few tri-monthly periods, and then for the peak of the hurricane season, La Nina becomes the much more significant chance, and it stays that way into the winter. So it still looks like we're on track for La Nina. But even if then, if we're not going to go into La Nina right away like we are right now, the stage is already set for an active hurricane season this year. As I said in my last video, potentially a historically active one too. And I think that was very well reflected when we had Hurricane Beryl happen just last week. So let's take a look now at the models. Let's see what's going on over the next week. In the Atlantic, you can see nothing much happens. We have a huge Bermuda Azores high, keeps the trade winds going nice and strong. Also, MJO really not that favorable, although we'll talk about that potentially changing as we head towards the middle to latter portion of the month. But at least in terms of any sort of significant development, right out to the next week, nothing is occurring on the GFS. And by the way, with the area of interest off the southeast coast, you can see that it just moves inland and it doesn't do much of anything significant off the southeast coast in terms of tropical development. So that is the Atlantic over the next 7 days. What about the Eastern Pacific? Yeah, as I said before, the models are not really that enthusiastic about much forming in the Eastern Pacific. At least by the GFS, they're not enthusiastic about much. We don't have any sort of areas of vorticity that are consolidating and concentrating and trying to develop into tropical systems. There is one area, and I think that is that area that the National Hurricane Center outlined, that does try. You can see that there is some sort of low pressure that does form, but I'd imagine it's probably very weak and doesn't do much at all on the GFS anyways, and we take it out to 1 week. So nothing much going on across both basins, especially in the Atlantic. It is a much needed change given what we just went through with Beryl. But what does the future look like for the Atlantic in terms of development? You can see why if we look at the velocity potential. This is where we are in the Atlantic right now. This is the region of the world we're looking at. And notice where we are with the velocity potential right now in present day, represented by the black line here. There is a lot of orange and yellow in the Atlantic, and that represents we're in a sinking air phase in terms of the general rising motion in the atmosphere. That's what velocity potential has to do with. But you do notice, especially as we get towards the mid to latter part of the month, we start getting these greens to return. Seems like especially near the 18th to the 20th, we start to see that occur right near Africa. And then we kind of start to see this sort of standing wave develop in the Indian Ocean and over Eastern Africa. And that's actually a very classic signature that we've seen over the last several years, which really helps to turn on the African monsoon, and as a result, help set up conditions to be favorable in the Atlantic. And that starts around mid-month this month, or in just about a week from now, things start becoming a little more favorable in the Atlantic. And I wouldn't be shocked if it's not long till we have something else to talk about in the Atlantic. It is the early season after all. Doesn't feel like it though, especially with what we went through Barrow. But watch the models; they'll probably begin to change over the next week, and I'm sure that eventually a signal will come along, and we'll have at least, I believe, one or two name storms before the end of the month, maybe a third one if we get lucky with some sort of spin up. But it wouldn't shock me at all, and either way, it is definitely setting up. Even if we don't have much the rest of this month, come next month into August and into the peak of the hurricane season, things will absolutely, with no doubt, get very busy. With that being said, though, I'm going to end it off for today. Nothing much else to talk about. If you're new to my channel, I would really appreciate it if you like this video, comment your thoughts as well, and subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you can get my videos when I upload them to the second that they are dropped. With that being said, stay safe, peace, love, and kindness to you all, and we will talk again tomorrow.